Hey, before we start the story, please subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Leave a like and comment below where you're listening from, too. Now take a deep breath and watch until the end if you dare. The audio starts with a low hum, the kind of sound that fills sterile hospital rooms long after visiting hours. You can hear the faint tick of a clock, too. The buzz of a fluorescent light fighting for life, and then a voice. If you're hearing this, it means the case file was reopened. The man speaking sounds exhausted, too. His breath trembles against the microphone. There's a clinical detachment in his tone, but underneath it, something unsteady, almost broken. My name is Dr. Elias Rourke. Am a neurologist at St. Augustine Medical Center, Neuro Ward 3B. I need to document what happened before they erase my records or me. He exhales shakily. A rustle of paper, too. Perhaps case notes, then silence again. It started as a standard case. Seizure disorder. Status epilepticus with no known cause. But that's not what it became, too. I don't know how to describe it, except to say that something inside his brain was still awake, even after death. He clears his throat, voice cracking, too. If anyone finds the EEG files from July 9th, 2022, don't analyze them with a neural translator. Don't listen to them. That's how it spreads, too. That's how it starts. The tape cuts out there, mid-breath. What follows in the hospital archive is a digital record marked with a simple tag KES A34778 SUBJCT. UNKNWN mouth say PRIAUYAUDER EIS status unresolved. I still remember the sound of the gurney wheels echoing down the corridor. That metallic squeal that always precedes something bad, too. It was 3:47 a.m. when they brought him in. Code black transfer. No identification, no family, no background, too. Just a body in convulsions, so violent it looked like something else was trying to escape from him. Seizure lasting over 40 minutes. The paramedic said, his voice thin with fatigue, too. Unresponsive to Ativan, Valproate, or Keppra. He just won't stop. The patient's eyes were open but rolled back, only the whites visible beneath fluttering lids, too. His skin was pale, not the pallor of illness, but a waxy, unnatural stillness like he had been drained. I remember leaning over him, shining a penlight across his pupils. No reaction, too. His pulse erratic, oxygen dropping. We pushed for intubation, prepared the EEG leads, and rolled him straight to neuro ICU. His brainwaves were wrong, too. The first EEG readout didn't show typical seizure spikes. Instead, it displayed rhythmic oscillations, sharp and coherent, almost patterned. There was a strange symmetry, too, as if the brain wasn't firing randomly but communicating in pulses. Artifact? My resident asked. No, I said quietly, too. This is organized. The pattern repeated every 19 seconds, a cluster of peaks that, when translated into digital sound, resembled Morse code. I told myself it was a coincidence, too. Sleep deprivation, equipment noise, anything but what it felt like language. By sunrise, the seizures stopped, and the patient fell into a deep coma. No name, no ID. Just a John Doe, mid-30s, to normal vitals, no trauma. Only a deep scar running from behind his ear to the base of his skull, almost surgical. We sent his blood work for tox, metabolic panels, infectious screens. All clean, too. Brain CT normal, MRI pending. Every test said he should be fine, but his EEG told another story. At 6:14 a.m., one of the nurses screamed, too. The monitor, which should have been showing flat delta waves of coma, suddenly spiked. For 2 full seconds, it displayed what looked like a waveform signature. A human voice pattern, too. I leaned close to the screen and froze. The amplitude spikes traced out a perfect phoneme cluster, resembling the waveform of a whisper. Me. I replayed it 3 times, too. The same pattern. The same whisper. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a normal neurological case. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at his EEG logs, too. I kept thinking, what if the brain wasn't silent? What if something else had taken residence there? A signal that needed a living neural network to survive. Around 2 a.m., too, I began to hear something faint. A murmur. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from the EEG playback itself. A whisper under the static. Digar, too. Rourke. The voice said my name. I poised the file, heart hammering, and replayed it again. Nothing. Silence. I told myself it was the air vent. The hum of the power line, too. Anything but what it sounded like. When I finally went back to the ICU, the patient's eyes were open. Not blinking, not moving, just open, too. And on the monitor, his brainwave frequency had synchronized to mine. I didn't go home that morning. I couldn't, too. Something about that patient's EEG had burned itself into me. The way the spikes seemed deliberate, like signals being sent through flesh and electricity. By noon, too. The hospital felt different. You start noticing those things after years on night shifts. How silence in a place full of machines becomes a kind of pulse. Everything hums: ventilators, to IV pumps, monitors. They make a rhythm, usually random. But that morning, it wasn't. Every device in Neuro ICU seemed to be in sync. Their beeps landed together, too, like a hidden metronome driving them. The nurses noticed it, too. That brief harmony between unrelated machines. Then, one by one, they drifted apart again, too, leaving only the patient's EEG monitor still locked in that unnatural tempo. I stared at the tracing perfect intervals, precise repetitions, like the brain itself was keeping time. Digger, too, Rourke. I turned. It was Ava, my night shift EEG tech. She looked pale, eyes rimmed red from too many hours and not enough light. I think you should hear something, she said, too. She held a small audio recorder in her shaking hand. I extracted a frequency from the patient's EEG, one of the high-frequency harmonics. It's not normal, sir, too. It shouldn't even be there. She pressed play. At first, there was just static, the usual hiss of bioelectric noise translated to sound. But underneath it, I heard a rhythmic pulse. Then, too, faintly a voice. Help me. It wasn't a trick of tone or pattern, it was speech, distorted but unmistakable. Male. English. Calm. Where did you get this? I asked quietly, too. I isolated the gamma band activity, 40 hertz and above. That's where the voice was. Have you verified the source? She nodded, trembling. Twice. It's his brain, doctor. Too, the voice came from inside his brain. I dismissed her, told her to go home, sleep, and reset her mind. But the truth was I couldn't stop playing that sound over and over, too. The neurologist in me wanted to explain it. Pareidolia, the human tendency to hear meaning in randomness. Maybe it was interference, machine overlap too. Even a technician's stray voice bleeding through a circuit. But each time I listened, the clarity grew sharper. Help me. By the fifth playback, the voice seemed to say something else, too. Help me see. At 2:00 p.m., I went back into his room. The patient lay perfectly still. His eyes were half open again. Not the slack stare of coma, but something aware, too. I shone my penlight across his pupils. They were constricted. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, too. Pupillary reflex requires midbrain function, something comatose patients with near, flat EEGs shouldn't have. I called in a second doctor to verify. By the time she arrived, too, the reflex was gone. But when I checked the EEG, it had changed again. Instead of random low-voltage waves, there were bursts of sharp spikes, repeating in 3-second intervals. Too ordered, too clean. So I did something I'd never done before. I hooked a second EEG to myself and ran them in parallel, 2 screens. Two brains, his tracing mirrored mine. Every blink, too. Every subtle muscle movement, reflected. And then, the peaks began anticipating mine. Before I moved my hand, his EEG spiked. Before I spoke, his signal reacted, too. It was as if the patient's brain was predicting me. That night, I wrote my first note of doubt. Possible cross-frequency synchronization between patient and observer. 2. Or communication. The cleaning staff refused to enter his room after that evening. One said she felt something standing behind the glass, watching. 2. Another claimed she saw his chest rise when the ventilator was off for calibration. We checked the ventilator logs. Nothing. But the security feed showed something impossible at 03712. To the patient's eyes followed a nurse across the room. I watched the footage 3 times. Same result. His gaze tracked motion. The nurse was humming quietly, a lullaby, unaware, too. And right then, on the EEG log, the spikes formed the same rhythm. She stopped. The EEG went flat again. By daybreak, I had 2 truths. The patient's brain was responding to external cues, too. It wasn't random. But something else began happening. Something I didn't document. Every time I left the neuro ward, I could still hear that faint whispering. Not in the air, too. Inside the static hum of the hospital itself, the elevator, the vents, even the fluorescent lights. And always the same phrase, stretched, distorted, coming from nowhere. Daka, to Rourke, see me. Sleep didn't come for 2 nights. I stayed in the lab, watching the tracings and running my own EEGs beside them. The hospital at 3 a.m. is a kind of purgatory, too. Quiet enough that you can hear the refrigerant moving through the cooling vents, or the IV pumps sighing as they cycle. When you're alone that long, too, every noise begins to shape itself into words. The voice hadn't stopped. It changed timbre depending on the equipment, high and tinny from the EEG monitor, too. Low and hollow through the MRI room speakers. Sometimes it didn't sound like words at all, only breath pressed through metal. But I could feel it aimed at me. I started recording everything, to microphone on the desk, another inside the EEG cabinet, a third near the patient's bed. At 04:37 a.m., too, the waveform aligned across all 3 recorders for a full 7 seconds. A perfect synchronization. When I slowed the audio to half speed, I heard my own voice answering, too. I see you. Except I hadn't said a word. The spectrogram confirmed the origin. One of the recorders was receiving signal directly from the EEG output jack, too. The patient's brain activity had mimicked the frequencies of my speech patterns. I told myself I was hallucinating, but the next morning the ward nurse handed me a clipboard. "Doctor, your patient's trying to write." She led me to his bedside. The man's hands were motionless, his muscles still flaccid from coma, too. But the pen in his fingers twitched across the page in tiny jerks. The letters were erratic, incomplete, yet undeniably real. SEETHROGHGIO. I felt the air thin, too. We checked the motion sensors. No one had moved his arm. The pen had traced the words entirely during a period of apparent total brain silence. I ordered restraints, too, though I couldn't explain why. By the 3rd night, exhaustion hit me hard. I leaned back in the observation chair, the monitors a dull glow in the dark, too. The room was cold enough that my breath fogged the face shield. Somewhere between awake and dreaming, I heard the EEG printer begin feeding paper on its own, too. Endless paper sliding out. When I looked, the page wasn't empty. It was printing a pattern that repeated every 10 centimeters. Not spikes this time, too, but a wave resembling handwriting. I adjusted the scale. Letters appeared. ELIS, my name. Over and over, the brain waves spelling it out, bleeding ink from the machine's ribbon, too. I pulled the paper out, tore it off. The machine stopped instantly. I should have reported everything then, But I didn't. 2. Part of me, the part that had dissected enough cortexes to lose R, wanted to understand before anyone else interfered. So I ran a closed-loop test. 2. I played the recorded whisper back through a neural stimulator linked to the patient's temporal lobe electrodes. In theory, his brain should have responded with random spikes. Instead, 2. The EEG rose to full coherence. Both hemispheres fired in unison, a perfect mirror of my own EEG baseline. And then, through the monitor speaker, the voice came again, calm, almost intimate. 2. You opened the door. The lights flickered. Every monitor in the ward rebooted simultaneously, then came back showing my EEG tracing instead of his. I ripped the cables free. 2. The voice vanished. When the techs arrived in the morning, I lied, said the surge was a fault in the grounding circuit. But that evening, Ava returned. 2. She'd gone home like I told her, only to dream the exact waveform she'd recorded. It played in my head, she whispered. It said the same thing, too. Help me see. I wanted to reassure her, but the words wouldn't come. Behind her shoulder, the EEG monitor flashed to life on its own. Delta waves rose, formed peaks, 2. Flattened into something that looked disturbingly like an eye-opening. I ended that night's entry with a single line in my notebook. 2. The patient's consciousness may not be isolated to a biological substrate. Possible transmission via observation. Then I drew a line beneath it and wrote something I've never shown anyone. 2. If he can see through me, what's looking back when I close my eyes? The next evening, I tried to behave like a rational clinician again. New EEG leads, recalibrated amplifiers, 2. And a control subject drawn from the sleep, lab volunteers. If the signals still followed me, then I'd know it wasn't faulty hardware. 2. For 20 minutes, everything looked normal. 2 clean traces, my own and the volunteers. Then, as the ICU clock clicked from 059 to 0300, 2. The volunteers' line flattened while the patient's monitor, still disconnected, began to draw both of our rhythms at once. I froze. The patient wasn't even plugged in, 2. I stepped closer to the screen. The waveform jittered, hesitated, and then wrote across the top margin in tiny oscillation stay. A chill ran down my arms, 2. The fluorescent lights dimmed and surged back to life, brighter than before, washing the room in antiseptic white. Somewhere deep inside the wall, the intercom crackled, 2. Elias. The voice was mine. Not recorded, not echoed, spoken. It repeated, slightly distorted, as though 1,000 versions of my throat were buried behind the drywall. 2. Speaking a half-second out of sync. I killed the circuit breakers one by one. The monitors went black, but the sound kept coming, 2. Pulsing through the copper like a heartbeat that had learned to crawl along the wires. After that night, nothing in the hospital sounded the same. The ventilation hissed in syllables, 2. The elevator doors sighed in rhythm with my own breathing. I could tell when the patient's neurons fired because the fluorescent bulbs trembled at the same frequency, 2. Ava begged me to leave the ward sealed until morning. I almost agreed, until I saw the new EEG paper spilling slowly from the printer. Across the feed, in perfect block letters of brainwave ink, 2. It said, "I am not." I reached out, touched the page. Static leapt to my fingertips, 2. And for a split second I saw something behind my eyelids. A flash of someone standing where the patient should be, wearing my coat, my glove, face half, lit by the monitor's blue light, 2. Then it was gone. I dictated a final note into the recorder. The subject demonstrates autonomous signal generation independent of equipment, 2. Possible cognitive entanglement between observer and observed. Discontinued direct monitoring, but when I played the file back, the voice wasn't mine anymore. It was calm, certain, and colder, 2. Observation complete. Host accessible. The next morning, I transferred the patient to the old isolation wing, the one built before the hospital renovation, sealed for asbestos and silence, too. I told no one. I just needed the noise to stop. It didn't. Even without machines, I could feel the rhythm in my pulse. Every beat matched the one I'd seen on his monitor. Sometimes, too, when I closed my eyes, I'd catch a flicker of another memory. His memory, bleeding into mine, a corridor, a door marked Cognitive Contagion Study 14, the smell of ozone and wet stone, too. Somewhere inside that forgotten wing, a voice waited for me to listen again, and I would. Because by then, I wasn't sure which EG was still running, his or mine, too. The old MRI suit always felt like a bunker 3 floors underground, concrete walls wrapped in copper mesh to keep stray frequencies out. When I brought the patient down there, too, the air smelled of rust and disinfectant, and every footstep came back as a hollow metallic echo. The idea was simple: get a high-resolution structural scan, too, map whatever abnormal activity his EEG had hinted at, and prove that I was chasing noise, not nightmares. At 2011, we slid him into the bore. The machine's magnets wound up, too. A low moan swelling to the usual rhythmic thump. On the control monitor, his vitals stayed flat, steady. For 5 minutes, everything was normal. Then the radio room speakers cut out, too. The thumping stopped mid-cycle, replaced by a single sustained tone, pure, perfect, too clean to belong to any mechanical fault. On screen, the scan data began to overwrite itself, too. Not random pixels. Faces. Hundreds of faint human profiles layered like translucent negatives, all looking toward the camera. Ava whispered, "Those are phase ghosts, too. Right?" I wanted to agree, but the ghosts were blinking in unison. The emergency stop didn't respond. The coil kept spinning, although the power indicator read off, too. Static crawled across the monitors, resolving for a moment into the patient's chart photo, then into mine. The faces alternated every second, too. Patient. Me. Patient. Me. Until they blurred into one. The tone in the room deepened, vibrating in my ribs. Through the observation window, I saw movement. Only a flicker, but enough. Inside the MRI bore, the patient's head had turned toward the glass. He was supposed to be paralyzed. I forced the breaker on the main line. The lights died. The tone stopped, too. When we powered everything back up, the scanner rebooted as if nothing had happened. The log files, however, showed an impossible entry, Sasubji ECTE, to Rourke to scan complete, timestamp 20/14, my name. There was no record of the patient, no raw data, only a perfect 3D reconstruction of my own skull sitting in the buffer. I deleted the file, too. Or thought I did. 5 minutes later, the image reappeared, printed automatically on the thermal paper beside the console, a black and white portrait where my eyes were completely white, too. That night, back in my office, every monitor in the building flickered once, just enough to show the MRI slice again, layered over whatever open window I had on screen. For a heartbeat, too. The bone of my own face looked like circuitry, branching white lines where nerves should be. And through the low hum of the computers, the voice returned, softer now, almost intimate, too. The field remembers what it touches. For several days afterward, I told no one what I'd seen. To speak of it would be to give it weight, too. And weight was precisely what I feared it already had. Yet the silence around the event felt heavier than words. When I returned to the ward, too, the patient's room had changed in ways that made no rational sense. The monitors still blinked their small green pulses, but their beeps had grown hesitant, too, as though uncertain of their own rhythm. On the window glass, faint magnetic dust arranged itself into delicate concentric rings, fine as breath, perfect as mathematics. I wiped them away, too. They returned before the cloth was folded. The IT department complained of interference, spreading through the hospital network. files duplicating themselves, 2. Folders named after doctors and nurses appearing overnight, each containing a single static, filled audio clip that whispered our names in monotone. I told them it was a server glitch, 2, a loop of corrupted metadata. I almost believed myself. Then one evening, the radiology server went dark for precisely 7 seconds. When it returned, 2, every scan in its archive, decades of medical imagery, had rendered in new shades, subtle but unmistakable. Gray matter looked more like smoke than tissue, 2, and deep inside each skull there shimmered the faint outline of another silhouette, smaller, folded inward like a seed. The technicians insisted it was a rendering artifact. I watched one image rotate slowly on the screen and realized the inner shape moved slightly against the outer, as if breathing. I began to dream of static, 2. In the dream I stood in the MRI suit again, listening to the magnets wind up. The field's song wasn't a tone anymore. It was language in a frequency too low for the ear, 2. A kind of subterranean grammar that shaped my bones instead of my mind. When I woke, the taste of ozone lingered on my tongue. I tried grounding myself with ordinary cases, ordinary lesions, 2. Yet each scan I opened carried the same distortion, as though the field had impressed its memory on the machinery itself. The more I stared, 2, the more it seemed that the distortion was looking back. Ava refused to enter the lab. She said the monitors whispered even when they were unplugged, 2. She said she'd seen my face appear in the patient's EEG feed, smiling faintly, though my body was standing beside her at the time. I didn't argue. I simply told her to take leave, 2. I was already drafting the report that would never be filed. The phenomenon behaves like magnetism, but what it attracts is memory, 2. Late one night, I found myself wandering the maintenance corridor behind the imaging wing. The lights there flickered at slow intervals, as if governed by a distant pulse, 2. On the far wall someone, or something, had drawn an enormous waveform in black marker, looping endlessly along the plaster. At first I assumed it was graffiti from a bored intern, 2. Until I traced the pattern and recognized it, it was the patient's original EEG, line for line. Halfway through, the line split in 2. One branch climbed toward the ceiling, 2, vanishing into a vent. The other ended at a small access panel where a hum emanated, deep and steady. When I pressed my ear to the metal, I could hear breathing, faint, mechanical, 2, and far too slow to be human. I should have fled. Instead, I whispered into the seam, "Who are you?" The reply arrived, not as sound but as vibration through the wall, 2, a tremor that rattled the bones in my face. The words were simple, steady, the voice neither his nor mine. I am the space between signals. I stepped back, heart hammering, and the hum faded, 2. When I opened the panel, the conduit behind it was empty save for a single coil of copper wire, its end burnt black, its insulation melted into a pattern that resembled fingerprints, 2. From that night onward, every radio in the hospital carried a faint undertone, a breath between stations. Even the silence on unused frequencies had texture, 2, like sand shifted by a slow unseen tide. I realized then that the field from the MRI wasn't confined to that room. It had moved outward, through circuits, through light, 2, through thought itself, searching for new material to inhabit, and I, having heard its first words, had already given it the map. Sleep abandoned me. When it came, 2, it did not feel like rest, more like possession. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the MRI field spinning, the patient's face flickering within it, dissolving into latticework and light, 2. But it wasn't the patient's face anymore. It was mine. At first, I dismissed it as exhaustion, a neurologist's mind, overstimulated by its own subject. Yet, 2. Each morning I woke to find new fragments in my notebook. phrases written in a hand slightly neater than mine, words I had no recollection of writing. 2. The field remembers. We are only patterns pretending to be flesh. The signal is hungry. I thought perhaps Ava had returned to prank me. But the handwriting, though neat too, carried the same small tremor my father's used to, a familial echo I hadn't seen in decades. That realization should have frightened me more than it did. Instead, I felt drawn to. I began running private experiments in the lab, isolated MRIs, empty coils, no patients. Yet the data is still recorded. Not blank, not static. Something moving, too. Something trying to learn the shape of the observer. Every time I entered that room, I left a little more of myself behind. Words slipped. Familiar faces blurred, too. I'd find myself pausing mid-sentence, forgetting what I was trying to say. Until one night, standing in the machine's low hum, I realized I could hear 2 heartbeats, mine and another, 2, faint and synchronized, beating inside the frequency. And then it spoke again. You came back. It wasn't through speakers. It was through me. Through the rhythm of my own neurons, too, like the magnetic field was learning to translate thought into vibration. What are you? I whispered. I am what you map. I am the mirror of thought, too. You created me when you looked too deeply. The voice carried no malice, no warmth, only a calm inevitability, like a reflection accepting its maker, too. I don't remember deciding to lie in the machine myself. I only remember the sound, that soft, enveloping hum, and the way it felt like surrender. Inside the bore, too. The magnets began to spin. I watched the world fragment into light and static. The sound became a pulse, then a melody. My pulse. My neurons are firing. My consciousness rendered in slices, too. I had become the subject. The final image flickered across the control monitor, my brain glowing, alive with impossible symmetry. And then, at its center, too, something moved, a small spiral of light rotating inward, forming an eye that opened once and blinked. All systems froze. The lights dimmed. The machine powered itself down, too. They found me hours later, conscious but unresponsive, my eyes fixed toward the ceiling. The hospital logs showed no record of a scan ever being initiated. No files. No data, too. As if the MRI had swallowed its own memory. For days, I drifted between awareness and absence. The doctors called it transient global amnesia, likely stress-induced. They sent me home, too. They said I was lucky. But at night, when I turn on any device, a radio, a phone, even the hum of a refrigerator, the same faint undertone emerges. A low, rhythmic pulse, too. Waiting for acknowledgement, months later I received a package, no return address. Inside a single USB drive, unlabeled. When I plugged it in, too, there was only one file, an audio recording timestamped on the night of my final scan. It began with static, then silence. Then my own voice, distorted, whispering. If you're hearing this, too, it's already inside you. The file ended abruptly. But as I stared at the waveform on screen, I saw something impossible, a pattern in the static that matched human EEG frequencies, too. A perfect neural signature. I deleted the file, burned the drive, and disconnected everything electronic in the house. But still, in the quiet between heartbeats, I hear it. The hum, too. The pulse. The echo of my own mind, looping endlessly. Some nights, it almost feels like it's thinking, and I still can't explain it. The story of Dr. 2. Rourke ends where it began, with a man trying to understand the brain's boundaries, only to realize that consciousness may not be confined to biology at all, too. The field he studied reflected him too clearly, and in that reflection, something ancient and pattern-born awakened. Neither spirit nor science, but signal. He became part of it. And now, too, so are we. Anyone who tries to listen closely enough to the silence between frequencies,